Welcome to the 2021 Governor's Summit on Early Language and Literacy and our session on literacy for Georgia. I'm Gary Cook. I'm the Data Analyst 1 at the Deal Center for Early Language and Literacy, and I will be assisting our presenter for today's session. A few housekeeping items to keep in mind before we get started. We encourage you to use the chat box to ask questions, share comments, and introduce yourself. There will also be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation if time allows. Participant handouts for this presentation are available in the auditorium below the access link and session description. If you have any technical assistance questions, please direct those to me in the chat box from the drop-down menu, and I will respond as quickly as possible. Also, please remember to remain muted throughout the session. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Caitlin McMunn Dooley. Dr. McMunn Dooley is the Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning at the Georgia Department of Education and a full professor of education at Georgia State University. She has led, evaluated, and funded research totaling more than $270 million. With over 50 publications, her research has been published in national and international publications. She has taught preschool and elementary grades and received her doctorate from the University of Texas at Austin. So without further ado, Dr. McMunn Dooley, I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Garrett. I really appreciate it. So I am sharing my screen. Let me play from the start. I was excited to do this presentation back when it was offered, only because at the time that I was invited to, I had just finished a 5-year analysis of what had been going on across our state. So what I'll be sharing with you today is what's been going on over the last 5 years in terms of our literacy outcomes. And I'll tell you a little bit about our strategy for how we've moved in that direction. If you are a district leader, this will be appropriate for you because it may help inform how you strategize in order to improve your literacy outcomes. If you're a school leader, I want you to note how I'm looking at the data and how we're using formative data in order to inform continuous improvement. And if you're a teacher, I will say that this gives you a lens to look at the forest through the trees. You're not going to get instructional practices here like you may have gotten in some other talks. In this talk, it really should help you understand where we are in Georgia in terms of our outcomes. And one of the reasons I think this is appropriate for all of you, all of these audiences, and especially if you're a policymaker. We have a new narrative in Georgia that we really have to reinforce. I know when I moved to Georgia 16 years ago, I was told, oh, you guys are at the bottom of the pack. And according to most of the metrics, we were not doing very well. And really what has been going on in Georgia is an amazing bright spot in our country. We have not only improved our literacy outcomes, but we have more students graduating from high school now and prepared for a post-secondary opportunity because of those literacy outcomes. So understand that what I'm trying to do here is help you all be good stewards and good representatives of our state by understanding what our data show. Little background about me. I came through as a teacher, as a professor, as a researcher, and now I sit at the Georgia Department of Education. And I like to say I've been in the system for a while. And I do believe that what we're doing in Georgia is significant system change. So this is not about how to change a teacher's mindset or how to change a teacher's knowledge, but how do we change a system so that we continue to improve over time. I'm going to share 4 big ideas. One is just an overview of the state of literacy in Georgia. Another is our literacy for learning, living, and leading in Georgia, or L4GA, and our theory of change. Not only do we work through L4GA for our grants that go out to our districts, but we also work through that lens for all the work that we do at the state agency. Then I'll share a timeline with you that kind of helps you understand how we've been funding these changes across our school systems. And then I have some takeaways for you to take back to your districts, to take back to your schools, so that you can use some of the resources that we've been developing for these continuous improvements. Before I begin on the data, I want to recognize the feelings in the room. This is a friend of mine who's a teacher, and this year has probably been the most difficult year of teaching she has ever had. So how are you feeling right now? A lot of teachers are feeling relieved that the school year is over. And a lot of teachers are feeling like they have a lot more work to do in these years to come to help kids recover from some of the lost opportunities that they would have had they been in the classroom, had they not had to quarantine for weeks at a time, had they not had to deal with some of the significant social issues associated with our pandemic. So thank you for teachers. All of these outcomes that I'll show you really are because of the teachers' hard work in classrooms. And I do want to recognize that our teachers right now need as many kudos as we can give them because they really have been struggling. The look on her face, she was explaining that she got into teaching because she loves teaching students, and she had her students online, but she didn't have them in the classroom, and she missed that energy of having students in the classroom. So this presentation is really in dedication to the hard work of our teachers. And what I'm going to do for you in this data that I'll show you, these are just snapshots. And I will be the first to say, I do not think that we should be testing our kids all the time. In the State Department of Education under State School Superintendent Richard Woods, we've been trying to reduce the number of high stakes tests associated with our students' learning. But those high stakes tests also give us a snapshot. And that's all this is a snapshot over time. So what's been going on in Georgia? The first thing that I look at in Georgia are Lexile outcomes. Lexiles, as you probably know, are a normed metric to define readability of text. So for example, if I were in third grade and I was reading a text that was around my third grade level, I would not even be able to show a 12th grade level of reading or a 12th grade metric related to Lexiles. So understand that Lexiles themselves are a test of the readability of text and then associated with a normed student population. So we do look at Lexiles because it offers a normed look at our students. And note that while our students have struggled more overall on the Lexile coming in, that top red dashed line shows what's happened on the milestones assessments when the students are emerging from our schools. They are emerging stronger in their Lexile scores by grade level than they've ever emerged before. And we do think that part of this is because we have done such a good job of scaffolding students so that we're not starting so quickly in the earlier grades with difficult texts. That's not to say we don't want them reading difficult texts, but we do want to scaffold them into that. Another piece of good news is this graph. In this graph, you can see where our students are entering and where they end up according to their Lexile scores. And that last cohort that's indicated here, that it's like an army green dashed line with a dot, that shows a trajectory that they're headed in, which again is very steep. And then this shows the Lexile demand limit. So remember I said a Lexile is only as good as the test it was given on, because Lexiles are a readability score of text and then associated with a norm student group. Note that as the students started within that text demand, they are very spread out in third grade. But by the time they get through 9th, 10th, 11th grade, the dots go up toward the top of what that demand upper limit is. So we are preparing students, and this is again on average, we are preparing students to read more difficult texts over time. Now, I say this all with the caveat that Lexile is just one snapshot. It's just one snapshot for how our kids are doing. But it is a good picture to show because it does demonstrate that our kids really are getting to become stronger readers. And ultimately, what we really want to show is that our kids are graduating from high school. Now, note that we still have some variability in these outcomes. However, the gaps among our subgroups are disappearing. They're getting tighter. I want to point out that the wonkiness of, it's a technical term, of the orange line that's a very small sample size in our state. So it understandably has some noise. And I'm not suggesting that we don't have subgroup gaps, but note the tightening of those gaps over time. Now, this indicates our graduation rate for 2019, which then again improved in 2020. We're at the point now in Georgia, when compared to 2015, when we came into office, to now, we have approximately 6,000 more students graduating from high school every year. Now, just to bring this into focus for you, this means that 6,000 more people in Georgia have access to post-secondary opportunities that they would not have had access to without a high school diploma. They have access to career opportunities that they would not have had access to. They have access to earning potential that they would not have had access to. But more importantly to me, they have access to intergenerational wealth that would have been difficult to have had they not earned a high school diploma. So to me, this is probably one of our most braggable charts because we are closing those gaps for our graduates and we're ensuring that our students are graduating from high school. Now, sometimes people say, well, they're graduating from high school, but do they really have the skills? And I want to show you what our outcomes look like so that I can answer that question for you. Oh, before I do that, I also want to show you this one. So this is our graduation rate for all of the different subgroups associated with economic disadvantage, students with disability. Now, note that I am concerned about our students who are designated as limited English proficient, and that's the technical designation. We would often call these English learners. Our students who are English learners, we have about 10% of our students designated as English learners, so 10% of about 1.7 million. Many of those students enter into kindergarten as English learners because they were speaking multiple languages in the home or a language other than English in the home. And more often than not, most of those students exit out of English learner status by 4th grade. So the students that you're seeing here who are graduating, these are students who are not your typical English learner. They may have come in as an English learner and they may have entered into our K-12 system in a later grade. So we have to really consider what we're doing to serve our English learners, not necessarily in K through 5, but this is a special group of English learners that we really have to make sure that we're serving. The other piece of data that I want to recognize here is the students with disabilities line. That's that red line that starts really low in 2011 and grows. It's still a gap, it is, but that is the fastest growing improvement that we have had in our state. So I don't want to dismiss the fact that while we still have a significantly poor, I will be the first to say, significantly poor graduation rate for students with disabilities, we have significantly improved this rate over the last 10 years. And we're continuing to do strategies to better serve students with disabilities. Among the other students, we're also closing the gaps for students who came in with economic disadvantage. Maybe they came in with a family who earns less than the federal poverty rate. And more often than not, what compounds that issue is when they're growing up in a community that is also economically disadvantaged. So we end up with concentrated poverty within our communities, and that creates a lack of access. So I want to just point out, though, that we are at the point now where we have approached the national average and are about to overtake the national average for graduation rate. And I do believe that that rate will continue to improve in a steep way. This is our trajectory for English learners. And I want to make sure that this one is very clear. So this is our English language, I'm sorry, not for English learners, for English language arts on our milestones outcomes per grade level. So this is 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and this is by cohort. So note that the dips are more indication of the nature of the assessment than the student population, unless you see a significant crossover in terms of the dip. But I do want to point out something. Remember I said in the Lexiles, our students are coming in pretty low in 3rd grade, but growing very quickly. And alternately, in 3rd grade for the English language arts milestones, note the light blue dot on the y-axis at 42. That is the strongest our students have ever performed in 3rd grade on the milestones assessment. What's different about the milestones and the Lexile? The Lexile is a pretty straightforward assessment of the readability of text, and we are wondering if students, if the assessment itself is creating a ceiling effect for students reading. At the same time, the English language arts milestones also measures students' language ability, and it begins to measure students' writing ability. And this is where we see some of the steepest inclines or steepest improvements. So we're very reassured because we believe that by improving writing and language, reading will follow suit. I've often said you can teach a child to read, but they may not learn how to write. But if you teach a child to write, they will learn how to read. So note that, that our 3rd graders are coming in stronger according to the milestones assessments. And then we have the best outcomes right now by cohort than we've ever had. So we're very reassured by the proficiency levels in the milestones assessments, and we do expect these to continuously improve over time. Just for the sake of comparison, I have here the mathematics outcomes so that you can see, well, was it just English language arts or was it all through the children's learning? And we do see a similar pattern across children's learning. So their math outcomes are also significantly improving in that 3rd grade band, and as well as improving over time. One of the things that I want to point out, however, is that we still have performance gaps, especially when we look at students with disabilities and students who are English learners. Those gaps, for the most part, are widening, and that's something that we want to really take care of. So we will be doing some extra efforts at the state level to ensure that our English learners and students with disabilities are better served for the purposes of learning English language arts. One of the things we're somewhat proud of, though, is that over the last 5 years, we have been improving and closing the gap for our students who are entering into schools with economic disadvantage. And that closing of the gap is very exciting because that's very rarely done. And that's a success story that I think our students and our teachers can tell together. And I hope that you all will help carry that message out. The National Assessment of Education Progress is the assessment that is done by the federal government for a sample of students every other year. We did not do the National Assessment of Education Progress this past year, the pandemic year, although it was scheduled for 2020 and 2021. So the NAEP assessment office decided to forego the assessment. So this tells you how we've been doing in our performance across the NAEP from 2003 through 2019. Again, this is just a snapshot, but note that the change in the performance gap has been improving over time to the point now where we are really trying to ensure that our performance gap between Georgia and the nation is closing significantly. We used to score significantly below the nation, and now we're scoring significantly higher, or not significantly higher. We're actually trending with the nation now. And these are our outcomes for subgroups of students and the rate of change in the percentage of students performing at or above the basic level on the NAEP. And you can see here that, again, we've been improving over time with more students getting better. They're performing at or above that national average over time. And then finally, I look at US News and World Report, Education Week, which is Quality Counts, because these external rankings of our education's of our state's education system are actually used by businesses when they decide if they want to relocate to Georgia. They're used by parents when they're trying to figure out where to send their kids to school. And so while I don't always love them for their metrics, I do look at them, and I do believe that it is another snapshot that we need to take into account. Now, this story is an interesting story because US News and World Report ranked Georgia. We were about average. They ranked us around 34th. But that has been improving, and the rate of change over time for US News and World Report has been about 2%. Now, what was really interesting to me was when Ed Week Quality Counts came out in 2019, and Georgia, when we just looked at our K-12 achievement, Georgia ranked 13th in the nation for K-12 achievement. We dropped back a bit. However, we are well beyond the national average for K-12 achievement. Now, you might ask, why is it different between Ed Week Quality Counts for K-12 achievement and Ed Week Quality Counts for overall score? The difference between those two metrics is that the K-12 achievement contributes to the overall score, but the overall score also has a metric called the chance of success. That chance of success is often taken from numbers from the Annie E. Casey Foundation's Kids Count data. And they rank students, they being Ed Week here and other organizations, rank the chance that a student can emerge from intergenerational poverty, whether or not a student can access the kinds of things that we know contribute to their learning success, such as healthcare, nutrition, things like that. And Georgia did not look as good when we look at the full picture of what we need to ensure student success. So the Ed Week Quality Counts is not growing as quickly as our K-12 achievement. And we believe that that indicates for us a needed movement to incorporate elements that improve services for the whole child. And that will improve our external rankings of our state education system. That brings me to the L4GA theory of change. So knowing what I just told you, what we did back in 2015 and 16 was we took an asset map of all of the elements that we have available to us and ensured that we have the pieces necessary to improve our state's educational system. We have the Georgia Department of Education. We have higher education. We have our regional education service agencies, our districts, our communities, our schools, and our families. And all of those work as a system to improve at the same time. Then we incorporated, in addition to those elements of the system, we incorporated what we really believed. We believed that improvements would be dependent on research-proven, evidence-based best practices for teaching and learning. We wanted to ensure that students had a personalized approach to learning, that teachers were responsive to what individual students needed, that everything we did was scalable and sustainable, and that no matter what we do, we're always in the business of improving schools themselves. So the inner ring where it says engaged leadership, continuity of instruction, tiered supports, formative and summative assessments, professional learning, and community partnerships, those are all elements of comprehensive school improvement. You cannot leave any one of those things out in order to improve our schools. And then finally, at the center of everything we do, our why. Why do we do what we do? We do it to serve children. That was our theory of change for L4GA. And we designed it to serve our students. Ultimately, what that ended up leading to was the Georgia Department of Education's continuous improvement design. And that's how we come to know our theory of change in L4GA. So what you see happening here in the Deal Center, and in fact, I've been saying I really wish I was sitting in Ron Ferguson's talk because I would much rather hear him talk than talk myself. What you see here is the elements of the L4GA theory of change at work. We believe that in order to ensure that all students are learning, we have to work with schools within their communities, within the context of their communities, in order to ensure the chance of success, in order to ensure that every student has access to everything they need, whether it's a meal on the table, whether it's clothes on their back, whether it's homes where they can do their homework. Right now, we're working significantly on internet access with the help of our governor and the help of the Federal Communications Commission. And all of those elements work together to ensure that chance of success. And then we're also working to ensure that we have improved instruction. And through those two elements, as long as we're looking at data and we're looking at it in a continuous improvement way, we can make sure that we identify what needs are, how we select our interventions, how we plan for implementation, how we implement those plans, and then how we monitor for long-term progress. So this is our L4GA theory of change. This is how we've been acting in the way that we have. So how do we track that? How do we know how we're doing? One of the ways that we do that is by looking at our community and school partnerships. And that's a really important thing to look at, because in order to improve the interactions between community members to serve our students' needs, we want to ensure that every element of the communities are being pulled in to provide the service. Now remember, these are the community's kids. They don't just belong to a school. So we have our schools actively reaching out to community organizations, actively partnering, identifying what needs they have, identifying what services can be provided, identifying literacy services that can be provided in out of school, after school programs. We've been working with hospitals. We've been working with our chambers of commerce. Just to give you a little insight as to how this looks, in one of our counties, they had a broadband access issue. And the school system was really frustrated because they kept saying, we have the homework gap. Our students do not have access to the internet when they go home and they can't do their homework. And they came to the Chamber of Commerce and they said, we need you to help us solve this problem. And guess what the Chamber of Commerce did? They worked with the businesses to open up hotspots in restaurants and in other areas, coffee houses, places where kids could sit and do their homework. so that if they didn't have access at home, they could certainly sit in some of those businesses. Because the business owner said, these are our kids too. And so now we have a way to get around that lack of access in the home so that kids can do their homework. And that's an excellent example of that partnership at work. So what this is a social network analysis. For every L4GA community, we provide for them an annual social network analysis where they can see how their institutions are connecting. Not only that, but we also show them the level by which they are connecting. And we call these levels networking, cooperation, coordination, coalition, and collaboration. And that's defined by several researchers who are looking at the power of partnerships. In a networking, you may know somebody in another organization. You may be able to call them and ask them for a favor. In many cases in schools, this is like asking the boosters to get money for uniforms for your baseball team or something like that. That would be a networking connection. And that's a far cry from true collaboration, where you have leaders in the organization sitting side by side, looking at data that they both have an investment in and trying to come up with joint solutions together, offering the assets that they have available in order to achieve that shared goal. And one of the presentations in this Deal Center Summit was on collective impact. And that is exactly what collaboration and coalition would use in order to provide that kind of support to children. Now, you cannot think that every partnership is going to get to the level of collaboration and coordination. It just it doesn't necessarily happen. And in fact, you can get to a point in partnerships where you finally say, okay, I've had enough. We need to back away. So it's the idea here in this social network analysis is not necessarily to get the circles bigger or to get them more robust all the time. The idea is that over time, the partnerships become more intentional for the purpose of serving the local students' needs. And that's really important because the way that we're looking at these social network analysis is really through a community action-oriented research perspective. It's not necessarily through a lens of, we just have to build out these social network maps. It really is through the conversations within the communities so that as the community comes together and sees these maps grow, they can make intentional decisions about what they need to do as a community in order to better serve their students. Another thing that we're doing is we are working very closely with our partners to ensure that we have student-centered instruction. Now, you see here some of our evidence-based strategies, and you've probably seen these before. I like to call these the 5 Fs. I say that tongue-in-cheek. You know the words fluency, phonics, phonemic awareness, comprehension, and vocabulary. But really what we're trying to do is grow comprehension and language abilities among children. And when we talk about vocabulary, we're really talking about word knowledge, not just word by word instruction, but true word knowledge. And so we're bringing the resources to bear. We have many of these resources offered for free. The bottom picture that you see there is the picture from the Cox campus through the Rollins Center at the Atlanta Speech School. We work directly with the Cox campus and the Rollins Center. We use the same research in order to provide these free resources to our teachers across the state. We've also partnered with Freddie Hebert in the Text Project. Again, free resources, free texts, all available in order to teach kids how words work and how our language works so that they can become better, not only with reading, but also as speakers and listeners and viewers and representers and writers. We also have coming up in July, we'll have a offering from our English Language Arts and L4GA teams, and those will be providing a series of workshops and sessions somewhat like this that will be highly instructionally focused. Of course, we have our friends from the Cox campus coming to share. We have friends from many of our universities coming to share. And we've made decisions about who gets to be part of that based on the evidence. They have to offer the evidence, the research evidence, in order to show what they know. And so we're very excited to offer that. It will be a virtual conference, the Language and Literacy Conference in Georgia. Another thing that really helps us do the student-centered perspective is we really keep track of how we're doing using formative assessments. And I want to give you some snapshots here of how we've been doing this through L4GA, thanks to our external evaluators at Georgia State University. And Gary Bingham, I don't know if you're in the audience, but Gary will be doing a talk at the closing session on some of these outcomes. So I didn't want to take away the thunder here, but I did want to show you all that when we look at the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, and this is, again, these are just snapshots. I'm not pushing the PPVT. I'm just saying this is one assessment that has a strong technical report that we could use to say, how are we doing in Georgia? What we are finding is that with the PPVT, when you look across our students by quintile, so this means at the beginning of the year, that's that blue column. At the beginning of the year, we tested the students, and then we divided them into 5 groups. Group number 1 being the poorest performers, and group number 5 being the strongest performers. That was in the fall. And then in the spring, we tested them again using the PPVT. And we looked at our poorest performers and our strongest performers. And what we see here is that our poorest performers actually learned the most through these evidence-based strategies. And our strongest performers probably didn't learn as much, but they weren't. I will be the first to say the PPVT has a ceiling effect in terms of vocabularies, in terms of vocabulary assessment. So while this does concern me a little bit, I was not that concerned when I saw that bit of a drop for our highest quintile. But in every other quintile, we are growing. And to have evidence-based strategies that really work with your poorest performers is really important. Chances are our strongest performers in kindergarten who are taking this assessment are already readers. And they're looking at this test going, why are you testing me on baby pictures? So we always have to take into account what tool we're using or what instrument we're using in order to create our snapshot. Now, this is a snapshot from this year, and this one does concern me. This is our kindergarten composite over time, and this is the percentage of students at or above benchmark. And this is using the assessments in order to look at how students fare over time as they're progressing through their learning. The bar graph on that's my left, I hope that's your left too. The bar graph on the left shows that we had a pretty wide distribution of students. And at the end of the year, what was happening was that students were learning some of those basic skills, but we are not doing as well with students who are accessing the curriculum well beyond those. Now, I also want to point out that this does not mean that students lost learning. These benchmarks are not the same tests over time. So it means, though, that we had some students come in as they had already learned and they were already above what that beginning year expectation would be. And in the end of the year assessment, we have an equal distribution, and that assessment is harder. Meaning an equal distribution in the students who are performing above, at, below, or well below. What really concerned me was this drop in the percentage of students at or above benchmark at the beginning of the year to the middle of the year. We did have some learning loss during those times, and we have started to recover already. but I am very concerned about those early grades because that was also where we had a drop in enrollment. We had a drop in pre-K enrollment and we had a drop in kindergarten enrollment. So we're doing a big push from the Georgia Department of Education to remind parents, please enroll your students and do not redshirt them, because the research shows that that will not serve them. So please encourage your local districts to do efforts to do kindergarten roundup and enroll your students as soon as possible. The sooner we get them in, the more likely it is we can teach them these early literacy skills. This is also a concerning formative assessment graph from our 3rd grade outcomes. And this is simply for oral reading fluency. Now, oral reading fluency is an indicator of oral reading automaticity, which is a very important skill for readers to have. It's not the only skill. In fact, we often say we have word callers sometimes. These are kids who have great oral reading fluency, but not very good comprehension. So note that, again, this is just a snapshot. But in our oral reading fluency, we would expect that students would be growing over time. And that historically is what we've been seeing in our L4GA formative assessments across the last 5 years. But what we saw this year was a drop in the benchmarks. That means the rate of growth in our oral reading fluency. And so we will have some work to do in these early grade levels in order to catch up. So our theory of change in Georgia is really to focus on that community effort and focus in on what students really need in order to improve instruction and make sure that the instruction is evidence-based and student-centered. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline that we've had to date, so that you can begin to see how we've been pushing out L4GA and the funds to support it. Now, I will also say not every school district is requiring these kinds of funds. In fact, every school district has access to every professional learning asset that we offer. Every school district has asset to our L4GA team, and every school district has access to any of these formative assessments. We're just through the Georgia Department of Education, we're just not paying for it in non-L4GA districts. But most school districts are to the point now where they are using some formative assessment, and that's really important. This shows how we pushed out the 2017 Striving Readers cohort, 2019 Comprehensive Literacy Development cohort. We just recently pushed out another cohort for the Comprehensive Literacy Development Grant. And we do believe that there may be one more cohort. So this is the big ta-da. We may have one more cohort being pushed out thanks to the support of Governor Kemp and the support of our state school superintendent. So stay tuned on that one, but we may be able to shade in more districts with these different strategies because we know it works. And then finally, some takeaways. You have access to this PowerPoint and you have access to all of these elements. We have available for you in the portal the Georgia Teacher Pipeline data. And this can help you at the district level know where you have shortages. One of the primary areas of shortages in many of our rural districts is in elementary, which is somewhat unusual and surprising. So feel free to look in the portal and pull up the Georgia Teacher Pipeline. You also have access to our professional learning catalog. That is on the main website for the Georgia Department of Education. We are now in our 3rd iteration of this catalog, where we take in all of the professional learning that's available across our state from the Georgia Department of Ed, and we push it out through this professional learning catalog. And you can contact us for any of these offerings. And yes, the Cox campus is one of the ones that we feature in there. And then finally, on Georgia Public Broadcasting and the Georgia Department of Education's website, you will see the Georgia Home Classroom. This is a suite of resources. It includes multiple lesson plans for teaching. It also includes recorded lessons by our Georgia teachers, so that if we have difficult to teach standards, our teachers can see how some of our expert teachers teach those lessons. They can also incorporate them into online lessons. And then we also now have our Get Readiness resources. These are both printable one-pagers so that you can pass these out in communities to families about how to ensure that your child may be ready for kindergarten. And doesn't mean that we would never take a child into kindergarten. We think all children are ready for school. Schools just need to be ready for kids. But many parents want to help their kids learn, and they want to know, what do you teach in kindergarten? Because it may help them know to go on a family vacation somewhere, or maybe pull in, start accessing their public library for particular books or things like that. So please look at those readiness resources. Also in those readiness resources are parent and teacher friendly descriptions of what those skills look like and how to teach them with things just around the house. So please look up that Georgia Home Classroom. You can just Google that. Look up our professional learning catalog and look up the Georgia Teacher Pipeline. Again, the Georgia Teacher Pipeline is only available on the portal. And that's it.
Great job, Dr. Dooley. That was a fantastic presentation. And on behalf of the Deal Center, we really appreciate your time today. So I don't see any questions in the chat box, but in order to facilitate a discussion during our last 10 minutes here, I'm going to go ahead and allow everyone to unmute. So you all now have that capability. So feel free to chime in with any questions or comments you have for Dr. Dooley.
I'm curious if there were any surprises in this. If you have any wonderings. And I can't see the chat, so if anybody writes in the chat, Garrett, you need to let me know.
Yes, I absolutely will. Nora Schlesinger said, great presentation and very important information.
Oh, Nora, hi. That also reminds me, one of the things that I'd left out of this, because we're still in the beginning processes of really getting underway, we are working with many partners, including Nora, to ensure that our students who have dyslexia are being served. And again, this was thanks to our governors, both of them, and that I've been in office since I've been in here, and I saw Mrs. Deal here, and hi, thank you for coming to this. I'm flattered and honored. But we have, the National Institutes of Health estimates that about 10% of our students suffer from dyslexia. The International Dyslexia Association estimates that it's about 20%. If I just look at our data in Georgia, and I make some assumptions, which are not worthy assumptions, but nonetheless, they help me do the numbers in my mind. If I were to say, okay, some of those students might be identified as specific learning disability simply because dyslexia does fit into that category of special education. And so I look at SLD numbers, and then I were to say, okay, most of our specific learning disabilities have to do with language and literacy. If I were to just take that number and compare it to what would be 10 to 20% of students within a particular year, and our birth rate is about 200,000, I would expect to see 10 to 20, I would expect to see 100 to 200,000 students, and then diminish from there, which ones might end up in specific learning disability, which ones might end up in reading support specifically. And what I see happening there is we have a significant under-identification issue in Georgia for dyslexia. And so we are trying to really teach our teachers and help our school administrators understand what the research is saying about dyslexia, because this is for many of our teachers, if you came out of your teacher education program 30 years ago, the research was not as ripe as it is now. So we're really doubling down on what it means for students who are struggling with dyslexia and how we can provide interventions, whether through general classroom tier 1 instruction, or whether we need to do significant interventions over time. And again, dyslexia is a continuum. So we need to understand it better, and we really need to focus on what our kids need better. So know that that information is coming out thanks to the help of Dr. Nora and Nora, if I pronounce your last name wrong, please forgive me.
Oh, it's so hard.
Am I right?
It's a very hard name.
But just know that we have many experts here in Georgia, and we now have endorsement programs that are available. And I am advising that every school have at least one person who has a dyslexia endorsement, because that gives you an in-house expert. It could be a teacher, it could be a speech language pathologist or provider. It could be a special education teacher. It could be general education teacher, but somebody should go ahead. If you're a principal, sign someone up for one of those endorsements. And our REIS have been excellent partners in ensuring that those are generally available, as have our institutes of higher ed.
And I would like to point out for teachers or administrators, the Georgia IDA does have grant money that you can apply for to go through dyslexia endorsement, or any sort of education that will take you through the path of dyslexia and a better understanding.
Yeah.
So Dr. Dooley, you actually do have a couple of questions now in the chat.
I thought that might rile people up.
Yeah. One of them is, what single action should districts take to improve ORF, especially in the 3rd grade?
Interesting. So to me, oral reading fluency is an indicator of much more than an isolated skill. When I was teaching in my undergraduate classes, I loved readers' theater. And I would recommend readers' theater as an opportunity that starts early on and is offered every year in general ed classrooms, tier 1 classrooms, because it's through that repeated reading that kids begin to get that automaticity. And it's also through that theater, the dramaturgy that takes place within readers' theater, that you get the prosody within reading. And because you're doing it over time and it's a social act, it's also quite inviting for students. So if you haven't learned about readers' theater, please do, but I would not wait until 3rd grade to do that. I would actually recommend it start early and continue on.
Excellent. So another question for you. Do you think the state will continue to offer support services similar to SES for our young readers to help improve reading outcomes?
And SES being what? Because I hear that and I think socioeconomic status, it could be social emotional skills.
Hi, this is Norris Green from Green Apple Tree Inc. Under the Bush administration, he had there were student support services where these companies could get money to tutor students. And like I said, it was under the No Child Left Behind initiative. So
isolated supplemental learning, yeah.
Yes. So I was curious if the state would, if they would be coming up with a program similar to that. I know a couple of parents are very leery about putting their children in a school setting. However, they may be a little more comfortable in a smaller group setting, face-to-face.
Yeah.
And just as a teacher, I've been doing online teaching with K-1 students, but you need that face-to-face with them when they're learning those skills.
I can talk a little bit about tutoring and skill building in that way, and then I also want to talk about an upcoming opportunity.
Okay.
So one of the things that I've been pushing as we have the COVID recovery money flowing through our systems is high frequency or high dosage tutoring. That has a lot of research behind it. In fact, it's one of our most frequently cited evidence-based practice.
Okay.
The key to high frequency tutoring, however, is that you don't do it outside of school, that you do it in a small group situation. So, 3 to 5 students, that you do it with a evidence-based curriculum, and that you do it regularly, multiple days in a row. I think that if you utilize that research base and still wanted to supplement outside of the school, then you would certainly want to use that research base and then carry it outside.
Okay.
I recommend that you look up the Georgia GSANS, Georgia Statewide After School Network.
Okay.
Katie Landis is the executive director.
Mm-hmm.
We will be working through GSAN and directly with GSAN, holding hands, partnered up in order to push out some of the American Recovery Act dollars
Okay.
into supplemental learning opportunities that sit outside of the school system. So they'll be, we'll work with GSANS to offer these grants for that kind of supplemental learning. But again, for those of you who are on that work in school districts, note that the research suggests that the most effective method for conducting the tutoring is within the structure of the school day. And I think that's mostly because students are much more likely to attend more frequently. Hence the term high frequency tutoring. But definitely look up the research on that. And you can look it up on our georgiainsights.com page. And I have a research summary already printed there. And then Katie also has one on the GSANS page, GSAN, Georgia Statewide After School Network.
Okay. And I just remembered SES stands for, I think it was Supplemental Educational Services. That's what that stood for.
And you know, they actually, when Race to the Top ended and we went through the change in ESSA, that was eliminated from the ESSA federal plan. And so we did not abide by it in the state plan. And primarily it was because while they were offering the opportunity to get money, they weren't the evaluations of that opportunity were not showing the cost benefit analysis, but they do show the evidence base for high frequency tutoring. So I would say use that evidence base and follow that, and know that there is recovery money coming through GSANS for supplemental learning opportunities.
Thank you so much.